Joining me now is best-selling author Douglas Murray. His latest work is The War on the West. Douglas, let's start with the ongoing meltdown over Donald Trump's election triumph. Former German Chancellor Angela Merkel has lashed out at the president-elect, saying he's driven by emotion in contrast to her factual approach. She also said, "I wish with all my heart that Kamala Harris defeats her competitor and becomes president." I don't know why she's still wishing that, because it's done and dusted. Douglas, if only she'd listened to Donald Trump when he warned her about Germany becoming dependent on Russian energy.
Yes, it's extraordinary, Rita. Angela Merkel is much revered in Europe, and it seems around the international community, for being this sort of strong woman who was the one who could make the tough decisions and all that sort of thing. But there were several just major geostrategic mistakes she made in her time in office, which are still having effects that reverberate across not just Europe, but the world. One was making Germany and indeed Europe so dominant on Russian gas. Of course, her predecessor as Chancellor actually went to work for Gazprom, the Putin Russia-owned gas company. She enmeshed Germany even tighter into that, and it's had consequences that have been unbelievable for holding Europe a kind of hostage in its relations with Russia and indeed with Ukraine. Secondly, I mean, apart from anything else, you have the fact that Angela Merkel, when she talks about emotion, I mean, she used emotion to make one of the worst decisions that's been made in our lifetimes in Europe, which was the decision that Europe's external borders should be opened and that over 1 million illegal migrants from all over the world should be allowed to just flood into Europe, something which is still happening because of the laxity of her border approach. She did that, it seems, purely from emotion. It's just astonishing sometimes, Rita, that for some reason, some politicians can make absolutely epoch-changing political mistakes and still be given reverential interviews by the world's media. And others can make tough decisions that actually save their countries. And they tend to be the ones that get harried in retirement by the media. It's astonishing watching the career of Angela Merkel after office as it was during office.
Well, as you said, her legacy is the changing face of Europe, and we'll experience that for decades to come. The illegal immigration crisis in the US and the plight of unaccompanied children has again been highlighted, this time by a toddler. She's from El Salvador, we're told, and she arrived in the US holding a post-it note with her name and number.
Venezuela? Sí. ¿Qué tantos años tienes? ¿Dos años? ¿No vienes con tu mamá y tu papá? ¿No? ¿Venezuela? ¿Para dónde vas, mamá? ¿Dónde están?
Douglas, there's been scant coverage of the fact that more than 500,000 unaccompanied children have crossed the border without a parent or guardian since 2021, or the fact that there's thousands of these children missing. More than 30,000 have failed to show up for court hearings, according to the Department of Homeland Security. What's become of some of these children? Their whereabouts are unknown.
And they'll remain unknown, sadly. And this is another of the things that happens from the let's make major decisions based on so-called emotion. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were incapable or unwilling to make sure that the southern border of the United States held. And so, as you say, hundreds of thousands of children, among others, have been effectively trafficked through the border since then. The American system is inevitably completely overwhelmed, as the European system has been in recent years. as the Australian system would have been if the Australian authorities hadn't have taken some control of their borders in recent years or recent decades. The US authorities do not have the capability to make sure that children born in the United States turn up to school and don't play truant. The idea that they could keep a tab on hundreds of thousands of illegals and children who are illegal migrants who've been trafficked over the border is frankly ludicrous. There just isn't the capability in DHS or anywhere else to address this. And all those I use the term carefully, all those so-called liberals who are in favor of so-called liberal border policies, they never bother to look at what the next steps are in the consequences of their so-called liberalism. They never bother. They thrive on the moral high of saying, at least we don't have strict borders. And then they let the story disappear because the moral high has disappeared. And it would disappear, wouldn't it? Because the rest of the story isn't going to be so good. The rest of the story is going to be children trafficked at worst, and at best put through a sort of black market system's semi-legal, illegal status for many years to come. So, well done, guys, for the emotion thing. This is what you get when you pretend that politics is like an episode of the show Glee.
Well, talking about operating on emotion and thinking you've got the moral high ground, I don't see much tearful coverage from the likes of CNN and MSNBC anchors. It was a very different story under the Trump administration, and I want to play you a clip here from MSNBC anchor Rachel Maddow. She broke down on air reporting that young children were being sent to what was called tender age shelters.
Trump administration officials have been sending babies and other young children, hold on, to at least three tender age shelters in South Texas. Lawyers and medical providers just, I think I'm gonna have to hand this off. Yeah. Sorry, that does it for us tonight.
Douglas, the numbers have exploded in the past 4 years. The hardship, the suffering, the number of missing and abused kids has exploded. But no more saturation coverage from the likes of Maddow. Indeed, there's barely any coverage at all.
No, I mean, she won't follow the story through. That famous meltdown, of course, was referring to a policy which happened under Barack Obama's presidency. And she didn't weep and break down about that. She wept and broke down because she was relating something which she believed, it seems, and you do have to wonder, sometimes these people do believe it, sometimes they don't, who knows, we don't have windows into men's souls, but she seemed to believe that this was a sort of quasi-fascistic thing, whereby if you have a border and if you were to detain any child in any place at that border for any time, you are effectively Nazi Germany. That's why these people got so visibly upset or performatively upset during that period. I wish they had the gumption to follow the story through and say, actually, as you and I have said many times, Rita, you either have a border or you don't. And if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. And borders are hard places. They are they're difficult, hard places for a reason, which is that the world cannot be. There is no conceivable world in which the developed world just has a seamless open border with the developing world. because, again, we've discussed this many times, but, too many people want to come to the developed world. Too many people want to benefit from the welfare state coming from terrible countries. There's no fault of their own, but coming from terrible countries which have either no welfare state or absolutely or no provisions for families and so on. And you either believe in the borders or you don't. You can debate specific issues about them. But when the left decided, as parts of it did in recent years, that the reaction to the fact that borders exist should be that borders shouldn't exist, they made a strategic and moral mistake as big as any that they have made, including the idea that children are pieces of Lego that you can take parts off and put parts on again. These people pursued really dangerous, deranged policies, and they always cloaked them under this cloak of compassion and care. And I just don't think it's good enough. It's like people who say, we need more compassion in politics and so on. You go, yes, there's a place for compassion, absolutely. But there's also a place for reason and rationalism.
Absolutely.
And that's just something which is worryingly absent.
Now, you did warn us some months ago about the ICC, and you've been proven right there. The International Criminal Court has now issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Does this mean, Douglas, that the democratically elected Prime Minister of the only Jewish state in the world is going to be arrested if he travels to France or Britain or Germany or indeed Australia?
Well, we're going to see on this, Rita, but it's got an exceptionally dangerous precedent. The International Criminal Court, of course, neither Israel nor America are signatories to it, very wisely, in my view, because I think they realize there's no scenario in which an Israeli or American soldier or politician, retired or serving, should ever be subjected to the whims of one of these corrupt so-called international bodies. But of course, many European countries and others are signatories to the International Criminal Court. This prosecutor from the UK, Karim Khan, has been the one pushing these arrest warrants. He did also issue an arrest warrant for one leader of Hamas who's dead. So that's brilliant, obviously. It seems that the International Criminal Court in its jurisdiction now has not just anyone in the world, including democratic leaders in its sights, but also the dead. So that's a total farce. But it's going to be a very interesting test, this. So now there are only arrest warrants out for the first time for democratically elected leaders. They've tried this stunt on Vladimir Putin, but they've never dared to try it on a democratically elected leader before. And they have with Netanyahu and Gallant. It has serious repercussions. As I mentioned in the New York Post, it could potentially mean that neither the Israeli Prime Minister nor the former defense minister can go, say, to Europe or even fly over European airspace. Some European countries have already said they absolutely will not recognize these absurd Kangaroo court warrants. Hungary, Austria, a number of other European countries have said absolutely they won't. The ones that I'm interested in are, for rather obvious reasons, I'm very interested in Britain. The Labour government is squirming about this. It has previously said it would observe the International Criminal Court's judgments and warrants. I think they probably know, among other things, that this puts them in an incredibly unpleasant, ugly, visibly ugly diplomatic situation vis-a-vis not just Israel, but America. And of course, also, maybe they also know, Rita, that if you're going to start going around issuing arrest warrants for war crimes, there are certain former Labour prime ministers who could quite easily in the near future be in the sights of that same Kangaroo court. But the other country I'm very interested
Exactly.
in is Germany, because of course Germany. Isn't it fascinating, Rita, that a court set up after World War II to prevent war crimes should end up in its first judgment against the democratically elected leader singling out the prime minister of the one Jewish state, and that Germany, a signatory to that court, and the statute undermines it, would actually possibly be arresting the leader of the one Jewish state. Fascinating to see what Germany does.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.